During low intensity and high duration activities, the body will use slow oxidative muscle fibers as they are slightly more resistant to fatigue. However, they produce lower forces compared to the higher intensity activities. The main energy store used is glycogen, and they produce energy aerobically by using the aerobic system. One way that our body will fatigue is due to the energy sources. For example, blood glucose depletion. This is when the glucose levels in the body are low, which is also known as hypoglycemic. When they are all used up, the athlete will hit the wall, where they are unable to continue. Increasing the glucose levels by carbohydrate ingestion increases carbohydrate oxidation and enhances endurance performance. That was research done by Coyle et al. In 1986. Another way that we will fatigue by using energy sources is glycogen depletion. During an event, we will want to use less glycogen and more fats. This is known as glycogen sparing. This will be important to know where the RER of fats are, as they will need to pace themselves or they'll use too much glycogen and can't continue. As you can see from this graph, at the start of training they have a much higher level of glycogen stores than they do at the end of training, and if they continue training without any rest days which will allow the glycogen to replenish, the store at the start of training will keep getting lower and lower after each day of training. One strategy to combat this is glucose ingestion. This will be the intake of energy gels or sugary drinks such as Lucozade. They will help maintain blood glucose levels during an event, and it will prevent them hitting the wall as where all the glycogen stores have been used up. At the same time, glycogen sparing will happen in the body, which will try to use other fuels, so we don't use our glycogen. This will increase the glucose stores quite drastically during an event, so therefore we can keep performing at a higher intensity. Another strategy will occur in the week coming up before an event. This is called glycogen loading. This is when, about 7 days before the event, we will cut down on the amount of glycogen we consume. However, at the same time we will train by performing exercise. This will keep the stores fairly low a couple of days before the event. However, then there'll be carbo loading. This is when you increase the amount of glycogen that you'll take in, and at the same time you aren't exercising, so the stores aren't being used up. This will increase the levels much beyond what they were originally. This is because the body will hold on to the stores of glycogen, therefore they won't run out because it's not very good for the body. There are also neuromuscular reasons for fatigue. For example, when an impulse is sent down, sodium, is also known as Na+, is pumped into a nerve, and at the same time potassium is passed out of a nerve. However, to repolarize a neuron, potassium ions are pumped back into a neuron and sodium has to come out of the neuron. But after every nerve impulse, some of the potassium or sodium ions are lost. Eventually they'll lose too many ions, and this means the brain will send an impulse. However, the muscles will never receive it as the impulse is too weak and can't be passed down the nerve. Another reason is because of acetylcholine or cholesterol decrease. If there isn't enough ACH crossing the synapse, then the muscles won't contract, as the impulse signal isn't strong enough to continue, as the muscles will only contract if the impulse is above the threshold. Cholesterol also helps reset ACH so it can be used again, and if there isn't enough, then ACH won't be reset, and therefore the signal cannot be passed over the motor unit synapse. Another reason is calcium depletion. Calcium will bind to troponin during the sliding filament theory, which will clear the binding site so that actin and myosin can bind together. Because of this binding site, it will then cause muscles to contract. However, if they don't have the binding site, then they are unable to bind together, and therefore they can't contract. This will cause fatigue, as the muscles just aren't able to contract and aren't able to complete the task. A decrease in acetylcholine and cholesterol will cause fatigue, as the muscles are unable to contract due to the lower strength of the impulse. And also a decrease in potassium and sodium ions will cause fatigue, as the muscles won't receive the signal, as the loss of potassium and sodium will cause a weaker impulse. During low intensity and high duration, which is also around 20% of exercise intensity, the main energy source that is being used will be fats. As you can see from the graph here, the fat is mainly around 80% fat and 20% carbohydrates. This will mean that RER will be quite low and around 0.7. One waste product is heat. Too much heat can have a negative impact on our performance, as it will cause blood vessels around our skin to vasodilate. This will mean that blood will be directed towards the skin instead of the working muscles. This will impact performance, as there will be a reduction in oxygen supply towards working muscles. As Gonzalo Alonso et al. In 1999 said, it can impair the performance of endurance events by performing vasodilation. Another waste product is water. Water can be lost through sweating during activity and is a product of aerobic respiration. It can cause dehydration, which could have a negative impact on the performance, as it causes blood to become thicker. It can also cause muscle cramps and muscle spasms. Another waste product is carbon dioxide. Again, carbon dioxide is a byproduct of aerobic respiration, and we need to remove it from the body during activity. CO2 is transported in three ways: the blood plasma, which is 3%, carboaminohemoglobin, which is 23%, and carbonic acid, which is 70%. The main reason why CO2 is a negative waste product is because the carbonic acid, which is the way that it's transported, can be turned into bicarbonate and H+. The H+ ions will increase the acidity of the muscles. This can cause a decrease in force and frequency of the impulse. This will then cause fatigue, because the force of the muscle contraction is too weak. Therefore, they are unable to complete the task. There are two strategies. For example, pre-cooling. This is where you decrease the temperature of the body before an event. This could be by wearing a cooling vest. As you can see from the graph, people who had a pre-cooling vest on before the event started, they had a much lower body temperature. And then, as you can see, it then increased. However, it took a lot longer to increase to the maximum compared to people who were in the control group or were preheated group. This will be a positive impact, as their temperature won't increase as much during an event. Another strategy is hydration. If an athlete is dehydrated, then it can cause many issues, as I previously said. For example, the blood becomes more thick, also known as the viscosity increases. This means that the heart will have to work harder to pump the blood around the body, which then can increase the heart rate. As you can see from this graph below, the group that took fluids maintained a much lower core temperature compared to the group that didn't take in any fluids. This will have a positive impact, as less vasodilation will occur around the skin, and therefore more oxygen will be able to be passed to the working muscles.